At our family meeting, my adopted sister looked down and said, "I lied about everything. I made it all up to get attention from mom and dad." 7 years after destroying my life, I stared at her and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no vindication, just cold calculation as I processed their desperate situation and exactly how much their confession was worth to me now. You see, I'm not the same broken college kid they threw out 7 years ago. I'm Jake Stevens, 29, senior partner at Strategic Security Solutions, pulling in $285,000 annually with a client roster that includes Fortune 500 executives and tech billionaires. I own a $1 to million home in the hills, drive a Tesla Model S, and have enough liquid assets to buy and sell my parents' entire middle-class existence 3 times over. But they don't know any of that yet. Let me explain how I went from sleeping in my car to sitting across from them in this coffee shop. I watched my father nervously fidget with his knockoff watch, while my mother's eyes darted between my custom-tailored suit and the Rolex Submariner on my wrist. This transformation didn't happen by accident, and it sure as hell wasn't built on forgiveness. 7 years ago, I was a 22-year-old college senior with everything going for me. Division II baseball captain, 3.85 GPA in business administration, already lined up for a management training program at a prestigious Chicago investment firm through my dad's connections. My parents, Richard and Patricia Stevens, lived in an upper-middle-class suburb where Dad worked as a financial advisor, making around $150,000, and Mom played part-time realtor while focusing on maintaining the family image. Then came the Tuesday in October that changed everything. I walked into a living room packed with extended family and found my 15-year-old adopted sister Lily sobbing into my grandmother's shoulder, spinning the most elaborate lie I'd ever heard. She claimed I'd been sexually abusing her for years, coming into her room at night, threatening her if she told anyone. Complete fabrication, but delivered with enough dramatic flair and specific details to convince everyone immediately. My father hit me with a right hook that would make heavyweights proud. My mother had already packed my belongings in trash bags. My Uncle Mike screamed about killing me, while my grandparents looked at me with disgust I'd never seen before. In less than an hour, I went from golden boy to family pariah, thrown out with nothing but the clothes on my back and a used F-150 truck. The worst part wasn't the accusation itself, it was how easily they believed it. No investigation, no questions about timeline inconsistencies, no checking the obvious alibi that I wasn't even home for the weekend she claimed the worst incident occurred. I was at a baseball tournament in Denver with photographic evidence all over social media, but nobody bothered to verify anything before destroying my life. Within weeks, my tuition payments were canceled mid-semester. I lost my truck when the engine cracked and I couldn't afford repairs. Got evicted when I couldn't make rent on the part-time security job I'd picked up. Started sleeping in the baseball equipment shed because my coach took pity on me, taking showers in the locker room and eating 1 meal a day with what remained of my meal plan. The rumors spread through my college like wildfire. Friends stopped returning calls. Girls moved away when I sat near them in class. I watched my GPA plummet from Dean's List to barely passing as I worked multiple jobs just to survive. 3 years of this downward spiral led me to standing on a bridge at 3 a.m. in the rain, ready to jump because I couldn't see any other way out. That's where I met Frank Castellano, the man who saved my life and taught me everything about strategic thinking. Retired Marine Corps, owner of a high-end security firm, Frank found me on that bridge and offered me something nobody else had in 3 years, a chance to rebuild on my own terms. "Son, you've been fighting the wrong battle," Frank told me that first night in his immaculate military-precise home. "You're trying to prove you're innocent to people who have already decided you're guilty. Stop defending and start building. Construct a life so successful, so unassailable, that their opinion becomes irrelevant." Frank hired me into his security firm at $45,000 annually, plus housing in his guest room. But more importantly, he taught me how to think strategically rather than emotionally, how to analyze situations for leverage points, how to build professional networks, how to turn every setback into an advantage. Within 6 months, I was handling personal security for tech executives and entertainment industry figures. Frank insisted I continue my education, so I finished my business degree through night classes while working days. He paid for specialized certifications in risk assessment, executive protection, and digital security systems. More crucially, he introduced me to his network of former military, law enforcement, and corporate security professionals. Information is power, Frank would say during our morning training sessions. But applied information is victory. Learn everything about your field, your clients, your competition, then use that knowledge systematically. By year 2, I was earning $85,000 and had my own apartment. By year 3, $120,000 and handling independent contracts, Frank referred to me. I was building relationships with corporate attorneys, private investigators, financial advisors, and technology specialists. Every client became a potential network connection. Every successful project, another reference for bigger opportunities. The breakthrough came when I successfully coordinated security for a hostile corporate takeover situation. The client, Marcus Webb, CEO of a mid-sized tech firm, was facing threats from shareholders trying to oust him. I didn't just provide physical security. I analyzed the entire situation, identified the key players, developed intelligence on their motivations and vulnerabilities, then coordinated with his legal team to neutralize the threat systematically. Marcus was so impressed, he offered me a partnership in a new venture, Strategic Security Solutions, specializing in comprehensive risk management for high-net-worth individuals and corporations. Not just bodyguards, but complete strategic protection, including financial security analysis, reputation management, digital privacy, and corporate intelligence. We started with $200,000 in seed capital from Marcus and 3 other investors Frank connected me with. Within 18 months, we had 12 full-time employees and contracts worth $2 million annually. By year 5, we were operating in 4 states with 37 employees and gross revenues exceeding $8 million. My personal compensation grew accordingly. Senior partner status at age 27 brought my salary to $285,000, plus profit sharing that added another $150,000 last year. I bought the house in the hills for cash, invested heavily in tech stocks and municipal bonds, built a portfolio worth $1. Million liquid assets plus real estate. But success wasn't just about money. It was about positioning. I became the guy that Fortune 500 executives call when they need serious problems solved discreetly. Corporate attorneys refer their most sensitive cases to my firm. I speak at industry conferences, serve on advisory boards, have been featured in Forbes and Entrepreneur magazine. More importantly, I learned from Frank's military background how to gather intelligence systematically. I maintained detailed files on competitors, potential threats, and yes, my original family. Not obsessively, just professionally. Annual background checks, social media monitoring, financial tracking through public records, standard risk assessment protocols I apply to all potential security concerns. So I knew exactly what Richard and Patricia Stevens' situation was, long before my mother called my office 3 weeks ago. I knew Dad's financial advisory practice had struggled after some bad investment recommendations cost him several major clients. I knew they'd downsized from the 4-bedroom colonial to a 2-bedroom condo. I knew Mom's real estate career had stalled when her reputation in their social circle took a hit after word got out about Lily's confession. Most importantly, I knew they were currently 3 months behind on condo association fees, had maxed out their credit cards, and were facing potential foreclosure within 60 days. I knew Lily had dropped out of community college and moved to Portland, where she worked retail for $12 an hour. I knew they'd sold most of their valuable possessions and were basically broke. When my mother called begging for a meeting, explaining that Lily had confessed everything and they needed to make things right, I already understood exactly what they really wanted. This wasn't about apologies or family reconciliation. This was about money. They needed financial rescue and had finally realized their successful son might be their only option. So I agreed to meet them, but on my terms. Public location, limited time, my rules. I brought Sophie, my fiancée, and Frank as backup. Not for protection, but as witnesses to whatever transpired. I also activated my phone's recording app because in my business, documentation is everything. They looked exactly like what they were. People who had made catastrophically poor decisions and were now facing consequences. Mom's hair more gray than brown, wearing a dress I recognized from family photos taken 5 years ago. Dad had lost significant weight, his once expensive wardrobe replaced by Target clearance items. Lily looked defeated, none of the dramatic flair that had convinced everyone of her lies as a teenager. "We need to talk about making amends," Dad began after the initial awkward pleasantries. "I'm listening," I replied, keeping my voice professionally neutral. Years of high-stakes client meetings had taught me the value of letting the other party reveal their position first. Mom started crying. "We're so sorry, Jake. We made terrible mistakes. Lily has told us everything, how she lied because she was jealous of your success, how it spiraled out of control." "And now you want what exactly?" I asked. The truth came out in a rush. They were facing foreclosure. Dad's business was failing. They'd burned through their savings and retirement accounts trying to stay afloat. Lily couldn't support herself on retail wages. They needed immediate financial assistance to avoid losing their home. "How much are we talking about?" I asked, pulling out my phone to take notes. The gesture was calculated. I wanted them to see me treating this like a business transaction. "The condo association fees are $2,400 behind," Dad admitted. "The mortgage is $3,100 monthly, and we're 3 months behind. We probably need about $15,000 to get current, plus maybe $5,000 to cover basic living expenses until I can rebuild my client base. $20,000. To them, it was a life-saving amount. To me, it was less than a month's salary. I could write that check without impacting my lifestyle at all. They knew this, which is why they assumed I'd help once they explained the situation. "And what exactly would I receive in exchange for this $20,000? I asked. The question confused them. They had expected guilt or family obligation to motivate me. They hadn't considered that I might approach this as a business negotiation. "We'd pay you back," Mom said quickly, "with interest, whatever rate you think is fair." "Based on what income?" I replied. "Dad, your business is failing. You have no substantial assets. Your credit score is probably sub 500 at this point. No bank would loan you $20, let alone $20,000. What makes you think I should?" The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Lily spoke up. "Because we're family," she said quietly. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but Mom and Dad shouldn't suffer for my lies." Family. I let the word hang in the air for a moment. "Tell me about family, Lily. Does family falsely accuse each other of felonies? Does family throw each other out without investigation? Does family cut off all financial support and leave each other homeless?" "We were trying to protect her," Dad said defensively. "She was just a child." "She was 15, old enough to understand the consequences of lying about sexual assault, old enough to watch me lose everything and choose to stay silent for 7 years. I looked directly at them. "But let's talk about you two, adults, parents. You had one job: protect both your children and find the truth. Instead, you chose sides without evidence." I pulled out my phone and showed them photographs I'd saved from my homeless period. Me with a black eye and split lip after getting beaten up by guys who'd heard the rumors. Me looking emaciated, sleeping in my car. Hospital records from when I nearly died of exposure. "This is what family looks like to me now," I said. "You want to know what happened after you threw me out? I spent 2 years living in my car. I got jumped and beaten by people who heard your rumors. I stood on a bridge ready to kill myself because the people who were supposed to love me believed the worst without question." Mom was sobbing now. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "We want to make it right," Dad said desperately. "What can we do?" "You want absolution for $20,000, I replied. "You want to write a check to your guilt and move on with clear consciences. But that's not how this works." I stood up, pulled out my wallet, and placed a $50 bill on the table to cover our coffee. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to walk out of here and continue building my successful life. You're going to face the consequences of your choices, just like I had to face the consequences of Lily's lies. Maybe losing everything will teach you what it felt like for me." "Please," Lily begged, "I'll do anything to make this right." "There is one thing," I said, pausing at the table. "I want you to remember how this feels, how it feels to have nowhere to turn, to face losing your home, to have people look at you differently. I want you to understand what powerlessness actually means. Maybe then you'll comprehend what you put me through." As we walked toward the exit, Mom grabbed my arm desperately. "Jake, please, what do you want from us? What would it take?" I looked at her for a long moment, considering. In my business, I've learned that the most effective negotiations happen when the other party is completely vulnerable, when they understand their position has no strength. "I want acknowledgement of what you actually did," I said finally. "Not just to Lily, but to me. I want you to understand that you didn't make a mistake. You made a choice. You chose to believe her over me. You chose to throw me out. You chose to cut me off completely. You chose to let me suffer for years rather than investigate or reconsider." "We acknowledge that," Dad said quickly. "We're sorry." "Sorry isn't enough. I want you to feel what I felt. I want you to rebuild from nothing like I had to. I want you to understand what it costs when family abandons you." Sophie touched my arm gently. "Jake, we should go." She was right. This conversation had served its purpose. They now understood my position, their position, and exactly where things stood between us. "My attorney will be in touch," I told them as we reached the door. "If you continue trying to contact me directly, I'll consider it harassment." The drive home was quiet. Sophie held my hand while Frank drove, both giving me space to process what had just happened. "How do you feel?" Sophie asked finally. "Satisfied," I said, and realized I meant it. For 7 years, I wondered if they ever questioned Lily's story, if they ever regretted what they did. Now, I know they only care because they need money. 3 days later, my attorney, Janet Richardson, called with an update. Richard and Patricia Stevens had contacted her office requesting a meeting about family reconciliation and financial arrangements. "They want to negotiate," Janet explained. "They're offering to make public statements clearing your name, to contact everyone who heard the original accusations and admit they were lies. In exchange, they want you to cover their immediate financial needs and consider ongoing family relationship." "What did you tell them?" "That you'll consider their proposal and respond within 30 days. I spent those 30 days consulting with Frank, with Sophie, and with Dr. Ramirez, the therapist I'd been seeing for 5 years. Each perspective was valuable, but ultimately the decision was mine. Frank's military background influenced his advice. You've won this engagement completely. They're surrendering and offering terms. The question is whether accepting their surrender serves your strategic interests, or if you're better served letting them face complete defeat." Sophie's perspective was more personal. "I support whatever you decide, but remember that forgiveness isn't for them, it's for you. You've built an amazing life despite what they did. Don't let their situation have power over your peace." Dr. Ramirez focused on psychological health. "You've processed the trauma, built resilience, created success despite their actions. The question now is what choice supports your continued emotional well-being and future happiness." After talking it through from every angle, I made my decision. I instructed Janet to respond with a counteroffer. I would provide a one-time payment of $25,000, enough to cover their immediate debts and basic living expenses for 6 months. In exchange, they would sign a comprehensive legal agreement that included several non-negotiable terms. First, written admissions of exactly what happened, including their failure to investigate, their choice to disown me, and the specific consequences I faced as a result. These statements would be provided to every family member, friend, and community contact who had heard the original accusations. Second, a formal written apology, acknowledging not just that they were wrong about the accusations, but that their response was a failure of parenting that caused measurable harm to my mental health, education, career prospects, and personal relationships. Third, an agreement that they would attend family therapy sessions with a counselor of my choosing for a minimum of 6 months to address the systemic failures that led to their actions. Fourth, a legally binding commitment that they would never contact me again for financial assistance, and that any future relationship would be contingent on their demonstration of genuine change through therapy and professional counseling. And finally, this agreement included a sunset clause. If they violated any terms or attempted to manipulate the situation for additional financial benefit, they would immediately owe me $50,000 in damages plus attorney fees. They agreed to everything within 48 hours. The public vindication was more satisfying than I'd expected. Watching relatives who had shunned me for 7 years suddenly reach out with awkward apologies and invitations to family events felt like a complete validation of Frank's strategic approach. My extended family's social media was full of posts about misunderstandings and complicated situations, but the message was clear. I had been wronged, and everyone now knew it. More importantly, the business impact was significant. Several potential clients who had heard whispers of the old accusations now had clear documentation that they were lies. My professional reputation, which I'd spent 7 years rebuilding, was now completely restored with interest. 6 months later, Richard and Patricia completed their therapy requirements and requested a meeting to discuss rebuilding a relationship. They had managed to stabilize their financial situation. Dad had joined a larger financial planning firm as an associate rather than running his own practice. Mom had gotten a steady job at a medical office, and they'd downsized again to a more affordable apartment. The change in their approach was immediately evident. No manipulation, no emotional appeals, no assumptions about family obligations. They acknowledged the specific harms they had caused, took responsibility for their choices, and asked what steps might be possible toward rebuilding trust. "We understand that we destroyed our relationship with you through our actions," Dad said. "We're not asking for forgiveness or expecting reconciliation. We're asking if there's any path where we might earn the opportunity to demonstrate that we've learned from our failures." It was exactly the conversation that should have happened 7 years earlier. Today we maintain limited contact. They attend major life events as guests, not family. They've met Sophie and been appropriately respectful about our relationship. When Sophie and I married last year, they attended the ceremony but understood they wouldn't be in family photos or have special roles. Most importantly, they've never asked for money again. And they've kept their word about the public vindication. When Sophie and I announced our engagement, my mother's social media post was careful to highlight my success and character, a stark contrast to her silence during my years of struggle. Lily moved back from Portland and has attempted to rebuild her own life. She completed a coding boot camp and now works as a junior developer for a small software company. She's in therapy, dealing with the psychological issues that led to her lies. We've had 2 conversations in the past year, both initiated by her therapist as part of her treatment program. "I don't expect forgiveness," she told me during our most recent conversation. "I just want you to know that I understand what I took from you wasn't just those 7 years. It was your faith in family, your sense of security, your ability to trust. I can't give those back, but I want you to know they're not forgotten." The most satisfying aspect of this entire situation isn't the money I have now or the success I've built. It's the realization that Frank was absolutely right. The best revenge isn't emotional, it's strategic. By focusing on building an unassailable life rather than fighting the original accusation, I created a position where they eventually had to come to me, on my terms, acknowledging their failures and requesting my consideration. My security firm now has 43 employees across 6 states. We're expanding into cybersecurity and corporate intelligence services. Sophie's art career has taken off internationally, with pieces selling in galleries from New York to Tokyo. We've bought a second property, a mountain cabin, where we spend weekends hiking and planning our future. Sometimes I think about the parallel universe where my parents had taken a different approach 7 years ago, where they had investigated before judging, protected both their children, sought truth instead of choosing sides. In that universe, maybe I would have become a financial advisor like Dad planned, married someone from our social circle, lived a comfortable but unremarkable suburban life. Instead, their catastrophic failure forced me to become someone stronger, more strategic, more successful than I ever would have been otherwise. Their worst decision became the catalyst for my best life. Frank, now in his 70s but still sharp as ever, serves as our company's strategic advisor and Sophie's honorary grandfather. He often reminds me that the greatest victories aren't won through force, but through patience, preparation, and positioning. "You didn't just survive what they did to you," he told me recently. "You transformed it into advantage. That's the difference between surviving and thriving." He's right. 7 years ago, they threw me away like garbage. Today, I'm the most successful person in my extended family, living exactly the life I choose, surrounded by people who respect and value me. They, meanwhile, learned what it actually costs when family abandons family. The lesson isn't about forgiveness or revenge. It's about understanding that the best response to injustice isn't emotional reaction, but strategic reconstruction. Build something so strong that their opinion becomes irrelevant, so successful that their regret becomes inevitable.